So hello everyone. My name is Dane Richmond. I'm a Trade and Investment Commissioner for the Australian Trade and Investment Commission based here in Shanghai, China. With me is my colleague Lawrence Jiang. Lawrence is our resident expert on the gaming industry. I myself really became familiar with the gaming industry about 3 years ago when Lawrence actually first suggested that we run a boot camp for Australian game developers interested in the China market. And over that 3-year journey, I've learnt a lot about the gaming industry. I've become a gamer myself, having acquired with my son a Nintendo Switch. And am now, I've learned a lot about the gaming world. And now we hope to sort of help you learn a bit more about what is the largest market for gaming in the world, which is China. And so today's session is really about covering some of the growth story of the China market, but then I really want to zero in on two primary elements. The first element is, how do I approach the China market? What do I need to do? What do I need to consider when coming to the China market? And then the second one is, who can help me? What services are available to me to help me navigate what is a very large but very complex and not necessarily easily accessed market here. And so we plan to speak today for about 30 minutes. We're really proud and we're very happy to be part of Melbourne International Game Week's program. So I'd like to thank my colleagues, friends and colleagues who work for the Victorian government in particular in helping bring this all together. And it's all through collaboration that we can make these things happen. I'd also like to thank IGEA, who we collaborated with this year on our first fully virtual boot camp for Australian game developers, and that really came together quite well. We're all struggling with the pandemic at the moment, and it's really good to see that events like Melbourne International Games Week are pressing ahead. I do feel firmly, and the statistics will back us up in a minute, that games in particular are incredibly beneficial to people throughout the pandemic. They give us a way to connect, they give us a way to be entertained, to learn, and from an economic perspective, it's a really sort of bright spot in what's an otherwise quite difficult environment at the moment. So without further ado, I will disappear and I will be replaced by my slides, and we hope that you get a lot out of this session, and if you have any questions or you'd like to connect with Austrade, please look us up. We're in every capital city across Australia, and we're here to help, and so please don't be shy in reaching out to us. Okay, the world's biggest gaming market, China, particularly over this year, has seen massive growth in the game industry. For the first 6 months of the year, China revenues from Chinese games reached close to 140 billion renminbi, which is a growth rate, a year-on-year growth rate of close to 23%. And really, what you're seeing there is the impact of the pandemic. The first 6 months of 2020 in China, like a lot of parts of the world, people were stuck at home. They were unable to go out to exercise, to recreate, and what that really did was turbocharge what were already quite clear growth patterns in the China gaming market. You'll see on the right-hand side there that mobile games in particular continue to dominate the market, and that's really where we see the future of gaming, particularly for mass consumer gaming, casual gaming, as being, particularly in the China market, 75% of the game market in China is now dominated by mobile users. It's interesting that as the lockdowns across China sort of started to unfold, that it's not surprising that game consumption really just exploded and took off. It also coincided with the Lunar New Year festival here, the Spring Festival. So Unfortunately, the pandemic sort of unfolded at the same time as the festival. But what that meant was that was a traditional time in China where people do engage in games. Big games in particular, tend to get launched around that time. And so we saw this confluence of both the pandemic and a national holiday really drive what is remarkable growth in an already enormous gaming market in China. Revenues are also up 30% year on year to 120 billion renminbi, and that's from China developed games. So the domestic developer scene is doing very well at the moment, and I think that what we're starting to see is a real significant local advantage, in particular when it comes to understanding what Chinese gamers want, what appeals. You're starting to see a lot of content that leverages traditional, Chinese culture. Games from obviously the most obvious, sort of themes are around the Three Kingdoms, a lot of Chinese sort of history coming through. But then you're also seeing sort of quite interesting games around calligraphy, games around traditional wood construction of buildings. So architecture that requires no nails is a traditional art in China, and that was developed into a game that got very, very popular indeed. Things that are quite obscure to foreigners have really gotten a lot of traction here with Chinese gamers, and what we'll talk about in a little bit is that the gaming market is increasingly diverse, and so it's not just sort of massive online multiplayer games or first-person shooters. It's anything you can think of. There's probably going to be a game for it in China. And so while you might be a small developer, while you might have a game that appeals sort of to a niche audience in China can be very large indeed and very, very lucrative. As you can see, sales of games developed overseas by overseas developers have also grown around 36% year on year to about $7.6 billion US. There are very popular titles from overseas, but as we can see, as we'll sort of see later, the share of overseas titles and games developed overseas versus domestic games is definitely heavily weighted in the domestic favor. So what that tells us is that there is a lot of work to do to access this market, and that's really what Austrade is here to help you do. You'll see that esports is an ongoing story. Esports has emerged as a very exciting prospect, a long-term growth driver in the market. China is now the world's largest esports market with over 5,000 recognized esports teams and about 100,000, in excess of 100,000 professional level esport players. Estimates vary, but we're looking at over 300 million fans of esports as of last year, projected to rise to over 350 million this year. And this, I think, has really been driven by the boom in the live streaming market. So esports are traditionally consumed via live streaming through online platforms in China. Obviously, again, during the pandemic and the associated lockdowns with the pandemic, we saw live streaming across multiple sectors, not just esports, but e-commerce, entertainment, really exploded in growth. And so esports has benefited from the growth in live streaming. Geographically, Chengdu, where Austrade has an office and Australia has a consulate, is investing quite heavily in promoting esports. Hangzhou and Shanghai in East China, so where I'm based in Shanghai, also investing quite heavily, particularly in sort of infrastructure, be it stadiums and venues for professional esports competitions, but also promoting teams to be based there. So esports in particular is an exciting prospect, and it's not sort of just your traditional. When I first heard of the term esports, I assumed it was people playing FIFA, which is a game actually on the Switch that I've grown to enjoy quite a lot. It's a lot nicer to play football on a computer screen and not have the associated injuries as I get older. But it's actually esports is very sort of diverse in China, and what counts as esports can be very diverse. So if your game has an esports element to it, its potential for China is something that you should consider. Total revenue for esports games was up 42% last year to about 13.9 billion, so $14 billion or so. And we saw that the user base, as you can see on the screen there, is growing about 10% year on year. So where we feel that esports is an area of considerable potential, and it's something that all developers should really be considering for their long-term strategy. Another key trend I want to touch on here is the ongoing rise of female gamers. In 2018, they made up just north of 40% of total gamers. That rose to sort of 45, 46% last year, and they probably represent about half of the gamers now, 50% in 2020. Heavily weighted towards mobile consumption, so smartphone is the tool of choice, but it really does press home that Chinese gamers it's a very diverse market. We've got hundreds of millions of people that are active gamers here. As you can see, up about 2% this year for the first 6 months to 660 million gamers, and so you're looking at in excess of 330 million female gamers, and that's an audience that should not be denied. And so understanding the needs of the diverse demographics of Chinese gamers is something that's incredibly important. We make a lot of assumptions about the gaming industry in general, but really within China, connecting with your audience and really zeroing in on what it is that they're looking for can be a very profitable endeavor indeed. When it comes to publishers, unlike a lot of markets, you'll see that there is a very long list of names there. Everyone knows Tencent Games, NetEase and Tencent are they continue to dominate the market. But as you can see, there are a multitude of publishers, game distributors, from very, very large players to very sort of small niche players. We feel that bigger is not always better, and finding the right partner for you, as we'll see later, is really the crucial decision that you'll make on your China journey. You'll see that Tencent is now obviously the largest game distributor in the world, and we, over the last 3 years, have worked with Tencent quite productively. They've welcomed Australian game developers to China. Unfortunately, this year we were unable to bring the developers to China physically, so we ran a virtual boot camp earlier in the year. But as travel restrictions ease, we're hopeful that over the next year or two we'll be able to bring you back to the market physically, and that we can start to visit some of these developers again. Suffice to say, you can see that both Tencent and NetEase and other large Chinese game distributors are looking to worldwide opportunities. They're looking for quality content wherever it may be. Yes, there are challenges in bringing content to the China market, but it's important to remember that companies like Tencent don't just publish games in China. They have a worldwide footprint, and so learning about how to pitch your game, how to pitch your content to these sorts of publishers can be very useful indeed, even if you're not considering China as an opportunity right now. As we can see, Honor of Kings remains number one. I believe over the first 6 months of the year, they've generated in excess of $1 billion in revenue for Honor of Kings alone. Over the Chinese New Year period, as I said, it coincided unfortunately with a lockdown of a lot of people. Honor of Kings was experiencing explosive growth. We're starting to see trends away, however, from massive multiplayer online role-playing games while it remains a larger segment. We're starting to see trends away from those sorts of games to more esport-friendly games. Battle arena games, first-person shooters, battle royales, and sport games are becoming popular because they better align with esport functions. Now, we know the market is big, we know the opportunities are big, but how do we go about actually getting our game into the market? And this is where things can be quite complicated. So I'm going to spend a fair bit of time now sort of going through the licensing and localization process. I'll touch on intellectual property, and then I'll finish with sort of, as I said, what is the key decision point for your journey in China, which is finding the right partner to bring your game to the market. And there are many reasons why you need to partner with a local company here to find success. I'll start by sort of covering the WHO, the National Press and Publication Administration, the NPPA. They're responsible essentially for the gaming sector in China. In order to distribute your game in China, you must be officially licensed. Once your game gets approved for distribution in China, you'll then receive an ISBN number that will allow you to publish your game in China, allow platforms to host your game, or allow people to directly download your game. While there are exceptions to this rule, so there are, in the past, people have, for example, published their games on Steam, on the global version of Steam, on iOS. The Chinese regulators have signaled that they'll be looking to sort of address that loophole in the market, and this will just make acquiring an ISBN all the more important in the future. As a wholly owned foreign company, you cannot on your own apply for an ISBN. You need to partner with a Chinese majority owned company to acquire a license to distribute in China. And this is sort of where finding the right partner, not only can they help you acquire the license, get the game distributed in China, get permission to operate in China, they also play a fundamental role in the localization of a game. So understanding what it is that Chinese consumers want. It could be anything from a color scheme to how the characters look and feel, the user experience, right through to certain cultural things. So, in China, certain numbers, certain colors, certain ways of doing things can be bad luck, can be good or bad. And this might be completely unbeknownst to you, and your game may sort of give a user a less than positive feeling, and that would hamper its success in the market. So having a local partner that understands the culture, understands the gaming culture in particular, understands your target niche market, is crucial. Not only can they help you acquire the license to operate in China, but they understand how to monetize it, how to best operate the game, how to market the game, how to get the game out into the hands of the people that will enjoy it. All prospective partners, however, do need to have an internet content provider license. And so they basically need to have permission to distribute content, cultural content, on the internet. And so that is really where, as part of your due diligence in looking at partners, it helps you sort of narrow the field and make sure that the partners that you do choose actually have permission to operate in China themselves. And when it comes to distributing games, distributing internet content. And that's something that Austrade can help you with. In order for a game to be approved by the NPPA, I think we need to consider a few things that may be different. Violent content in general is a no-go. The most public and sort of famous example of this is with PUBG. So PUBG, I think, Lawrence, it's fair to say, is the most popular game in the worldwide. I tried it myself. I did not do very well. But it's an interesting game, but it also is obviously quite a violent game. In China, the game was localized, and the game is called Game of Peace. So some of the more violent elements of the game, we're talking about corpses, people who have been shot, pools of blood. They do not exist in Game of Peace. So those elements were removed in order for the game to have permission to operate and be distributed in China. Anything that promotes sort of obscenity, drug use, gambling. So, for example, poker and mahjong games, which can be quite popular, have recently been banned because they promote sort of gambling. Gambling is associated with those games. So if your game is sort of, if you feel, and again, this is something you can always ask Austrade about, or a local partner, or IGEA about, or our partners at the Victoria government about, if your game sort of, you think promote, maybe has elements about it that may be sort of not necessarily palatable to the NPPA or to Chinese social mores, then ask. It may be, it's an easy thing to say, look, I think this game, while it does very well everywhere else, might not be for the Chinese market because it features X, Y, and Z elements. And that just helps you really narrow your focus when it comes to export. If you don't think the game's for China, knowing that early is actually a really good thing. However, in my experience, we've done 3 boot camps now for Australian game developers. Australian content tends to be quirky and interesting as opposed to sort of shoot 'em up, violent sort of content. Not to say that we can't produce that kind of content, but in my experience, the games that have come up on our boot camps, the developers that have come up on our boot camps have really sort of, it's quite interesting, unique content that doesn't really sort of focus on the more violent elements or the sort of more hardcore elements of, say gambling, drug use, etc. So I don't suspect that the majority of you will have an issue, but it always pays to check. Virtual currency over the last sort of decade or so, it really stems back to games like, I think, World of Warcraft that got very popular in China. Virtual currency plays a crucial role in those sort of, particularly those multiplayer online games. There are rules around that. China has been regulating this, I think, really sort of for the last 10 years. And virtual currency sort of regulations want to ensure that basically the online economy, the fantasy economy, does not impact the real economy. Things like limiting the amount of online currency that can be traded in a game at any one time is regulated. Issuing too much virtual currency in order to generate real world revenues for a game developer are regulated. Separating sort of virtual currency from e-commerce, for example, so that you can only use virtual currency to purchase virtual items within a game. You can't sort of sell them on third platforms. At least you can't legally sell them on third platforms. Things like lucky draws, lotteries, things that look and feel like gambling are frowned upon, and converting sort of virtual currency back into real world currency is also not allowed. So if virtual currency is a part of your game, it's not that it's banned in China, it's just something that you'll need to comply with regulation, and it will make sort of that regulatory environment slightly more complex for you. But it's not banned, it's just something you need to consider. Likewise with loot boxes, I think, again, as someone who's a relatively new gamer, I've learned a lot in the last sort of few years about how the economics of games work. So China started to, again, around 10 years ago, look at loot boxes and how they might regulate them. And last year the NPPA introduced new regulations around loot boxes, so you can't acquire them with real money. Things like the items that you might find within a loot box, for example, you have to be able to get those by, say, grinding in the game, so working to do other tasks in the game. An item can't exclusively appear in a loot box and only in a loot box, for example. You must sort of be quite transparent about the chances of winning an item, and that information should be very clear to the user. Results of loot box wins, for example, have to be displayed for a few, sort of the last couple of months of data need to be displayed on your website. And generally, they try to limit the number of loot boxes that a player can open in a day. Again, if it looks like gambling and it smells like gambling, then it's probably going to be regulated. So loot boxes are a possibility, but they're not. It's still something that's regulated quite carefully here. When it comes to minors, gaming addiction in China is something that's taken very, very seriously. While we have the rise of professional esports, and that's being encouraged, and gaming in itself is not seen as a necessarily a bad thing in China. Gaming addiction is, and so there's a responsibility on the game developers and game distributors to ensure that that anti-addiction measures are taken, particularly when it pertains to minors. With the new policy, there'll be an updated sort of registration system so that that the player, the age of the player, the identity of the player will be known, and if that player is a minor, for example, then the game has to automatically implement an anti-addiction system, which stops minors from playing for more than 1.5 hours of that game on weekdays and 3 hours on weekends and holidays, and they should be blocked from playing it at all between 10 p.m. and 8 a.m. So those are the times when children should be either sleeping or studying, and so it's been taken very seriously here. Things like payment options, so in-app purchases, for example, for children under the age of 8, forbidden completely, but between 8 and 16, there are limits on how large those transactions can be. Again, none of this is prohibited, but it is highly regulated. I'll talk a bit now, again, and we could spend days on sort of diving into the regulation and localization, the licensing and localization elements of this, but that's really something that we do in our boot camps. And if you do have questions around sort of what the mechanics of actually getting your game into the market might look like, that's something that's best answered with a bit more depth than we have today. I'll touch briefly on intellectual property. Suffice to say that China is a first-to-file jurisdiction. So if your game, for example, is getting traction outside of China, it's getting quite popular, and it could be the look and feel of the game, characters in the game itself, your logo. So things like the IP, how the game actually works, but also trademarks, characters, copyright, for example. In China, whoever files that IP first owns it. And so it could be filed unbeknownst to you. Let's say your game is getting quite popular online in markets other than China. Someone notices, well, that could do quite well here. I'll go ahead and file that. And that can create a very big headache for you when it is time for you to actually explore the China market. So even if you're not planning to distribute your game in China, you should consider registering your IP in the market to guard against IP theft and bad faith filings. I guess contrary to popular opinion, China does have a fairly robust IP protection system. If you file and you file correctly and you monitor your IP in the market, there are recourses that you can take if that IP is being violated. And so the idea that, I don't understand China, China's difficult, therefore I won't bother filing anything because I'll lose anyway, doesn't really hold water. Investing in sound legal counsel and making sure that your IP is secured for China is your best defense and is incredibly important. And if you have any plans for China at all, it's even more important. It's a pain to have to spend money on lawyer fees to file your IP, but the cost of not doing so far outweighs those initial costs, and it actually isn't that expensive. And often you can claim those expenses back through, say, the use of export market development grants, which Austrade manage. So it's definitely something that you should get onto early in your export journey, regardless of whether or not China is your sort of first destination or something that a market that perhaps you're not necessarily that interested in. Having your IP protected in a market like China is incredibly important. Finally, we move to finding the right partner for your game. I've been in this position now for about 3 years. I've touched on multiple industries, worked with companies both big and very small, and I have not yet seen a company that has found great success in China by doing everything by themselves and going it completely alone. Finding the right local partner for your game in the gaming context, is absolutely important, because without that you cannot acquire a license to operate. But on a more broad scale, they are the ones that understand the market. They understand gamers. Even, I would say, Australian-born Chinese people, or Chinese people who have migrated to Australia, who are developing games for the China market, they tend to realize quite quickly that China is a very fast-moving market, a very fast-moving target. And if you've been out of the country for 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, your understanding of the Chinese gamer is not current. And local partners and publishers and distributors who can actually help get your game licensed here also understand how to localize that game and really tailor your game for the local tastes. So finding the right partner I would say, is the most important decision you'll make on your journey here. As we saw, the China gaming market is quite fragmented. There is a multitude of platforms, app stores, and publishers to consider. In other markets, there might be a handful of publishers to consider, or a handful of app stores. There's not that many. In China, just for Android, there are, how many would there be? Hundreds, thousands of app stores. And so it's a very diverse market. And so finding the right partner to help you navigate that market is crucial. Thankfully, Austrade is here to help. We're quite passionate about the Australian gaming industry and what Australian gaming developers can do. And through boot camps and landing pad residences, which I'll get into in a minute, we can help understand how to refine your pitch, explain what your game does and the appeal, and then help sort of zero in on finding the right partners for the market. When it comes to China, here are some sort of things I've learned over my time here. Strategy is everything, and this actually applies to companies in any sector. Really listen to diverse sources of advice, and not just local partners, not just Austrade, not just our colleagues in the state and territory governments, not just IGEA, so the industry peak bodies, for example, but really do your research, talk far and wide. At the moment, we're unable to travel. And as you saw earlier, it's not that easy to get a foreign game published in China. So now's the time to really, if you're interested in China, to do your research, to really look at what is required so that when things do ease up, and we all hope they do sooner rather than later, that you're able to actually press forward with a well-devised strategy. Be considerate of national and regional level industry policy. As I said, the gaming market is a rapidly evolving space, particularly here, and particularly from a regulatory perspective. So regulations on almost every aspect of the user experience of games, from what sort of content is acceptable to how the in-game economics might work and how you might monetize your game, are all subject to regulation. Things aren't banned wholesale here, but it's important to understand how will my game navigate this regulatory environment, and how do I get my game in front of the most people and generate the most income? That's the question, and that's really something that you need to be considerate of when you're looking at national and regional level policies. Definitely don't leave your ethics in the departure lounge back in Australia. A lot of people, for some reason, think that China is sort of like the Wild West of business, and it just takes a few connections and off you go. And the further, it couldn't be further from the truth. Things like contracts, business ethics, and how you conduct yourself are very, very important here. And the saying goes in the gaming space, we have very large, quite sophisticated companies operating in the space here. Some of the world's largest companies operate in the gaming space here. And so really understanding how you present yourself and your company is very important, and doing things by the book, investing in sound legal advice, for example, market research, is absolutely crucial, because it's a complex market, and if you skimp on sound advice, you sort of get what you pay for, and it ends up costing you a lot in the long run. be realistic about time expectations and how much you might need to invest in order to find your way here. It's definitely not a get-rich-quick market. While the market itself is very big, as we saw, in excess of 660 million gamers this year, it's also difficult to access, and it can take a lot of work to connect with the customer. These customers play on a multitude of platforms. The platforms are always changing. Live streaming is changing. Where the gamer's sort of attention is focused is constantly changing. And so the ability to connect with customers and really build a community around your game. The companies that do the best here are the ones that can build a community of super fans. You don't need to get millions of gamers to like your game. You just need to get the right gamers to like your game. And if you're able to build a community of loyal fans, one of the success stories that we've had over the last few years, Savvy Soda, the company was really able to build a loyal community of sort of fanatics about the game, people that were really into the game, that loved the game, that started to branch off and do all sorts of other cool kind of social media stuff about the game, building Lego versions of the starships in Savvy Soda's games. That's a really good example to me of how you build a community. It's not going to have the number of gamers that, say, Honor of Kings will have in China, but it doesn't need to. It's about building this community of people that are loyal and will follow you and support the game. That's all very complicated and can sound intimidating, but thankfully we have a program called the Landing Pads program here at Austrade. We have locations around the world. If what I've just sort of spoken to you, and as I said, China is a very large but very complex market, and it's not necessarily that easy for foreign game developers to enter the market. Don't just think China, think beyond China as well. We have locations around the world, and the landing pads are really there to bring tech-enabled Australian startups, scale-ups, and SMEs to the market. And I always find one of the crucial there's two crucial elements to the program: time and money. The program, as you will see, the traditional 90-day program, it's 90 days at a co-working space in the market. So we physically, when we can, bring you to the market. We help you tap into the local ecosystem here. So there is a very sophisticated gaming ecosystem here. So if you were to come to the market, you have sort of this 3-month window of time in which to really understand the mechanics of bringing your game to the market, who to connect to, finding that right partner, validating your product with the Chinese consumer. And that's all done free of charge. So I think really, particularly what smaller companies lack, they lack two things. One is time and one is money. Exporting is a very expensive undertaking and can be very time consuming. And so what the landing pad aims to do is offset that by offering sort of free service for that 90-day period to companies to really come and test out the market. And that to me is the game changer. If you were to sort of be curious about a market, be it in the US, Europe, in Asia, through either the Singapore or the Shanghai landing pads, for example, or even in Tel Aviv, it can be a daunting prospect to invest that much money and time into a market. What the landing pad allows us to do is offset some of that initial upfront cost and really allow you to explore the market and validate your product without investing too much in terms of your own capital into Austrade. You obviously need to fly yourself up here, house yourself, feed yourself, but the rest of the programming is handled by us. At the moment, unfortunately, because of border closures and travel restrictions, we're unable to bring people to the market. So we do provide, we've been running virtual boot camps. We ran a virtual boot camp for the gaming industry earlier this year. We'll be running another one next year. But if you do have a game that you feel is ready for action, ready to come to the China market, please do reach out to us. We're flexible, as is everyone at the moment, and we'll see what we can do for you within the sort of travel restrictions that we're all currently living under. The program is really aimed at three things, and I think boot camps that we run are also aimed at this, but really coming to the market, we break down into three stages. One is get set up. So get that strategy in place, understand the market, understand what you're trying to do, understand, say, for example, the mechanics of getting a license to distribute your game in China, and understand what is this going to take for me to do? What do I need to invest? How long will it take? And how much money will it take? And is my game right for this market? The second phase is really getting connected. That's getting implanted into the ecosystem. You know, Tencent, everyone knows Tencent, but is Tencent the right partner for me? There are actually, as we sort of touched on, a multitude of options here to partner with, not just for mainland China, but also globally now, as Chinese game developers and publishers are looking at worldwide markets. Get connected to the ecosystem. Who can help me the best? What culture best suits my company culture? Do I need investment? Often, China in particular can be a very expensive place to do business. And so getting investment for marketing, getting investment for further development, localization can really be a game changer. And that's where we really want to see you get back for long-term operation. China is, as we said earlier, is not a get-rich-quick market. And finding success, finding traction with local gamers in particular can take quite a long time, can take very targeted marketing, and that doesn't come cheap. And so finding a partner that can co-invest in your China story is the most, as I said, is the most important decision. And bigger is not always best. It's finding the right partner. That it may be that Tencent is the partner for you. It may be that NetEase is the partner for you. But that's not necessarily the case. And so we look quite wide and broadly for the right partner for you. And we want to be part of your journey. We're here to help you. Lawrence and myself over the last 3 years have really sort of my mind's been blown with the amount of talent that's in Australia. I think the gaming industry is getting more attention and traction in Australia, particularly with the government. I've spent more time this year speaking about the gaming industry than I have in the last 2 years, and that's a really good sign. We're excited. We're in the market. We're here to help you. Yes, it might mean that over the next few years we'll be connecting via WebEx, but thankfully the gaming industry is very comfortable with doing things virtually, and I think that the opportunities here, the execution can be challenging. We're all in a challenging environment, but the best way forward is to work together. So if you'd like to know more about how to work with Austrade, please do reach out to your local Austrade office. We have an office in every capital city in Australia. We'd love to hear from you, and we're here to help. Thank you very much.